Well, I would never have guessed in a million years that I would be in this position, sitting here making a YouTube video about this topic. Now, I've daydreamed about, oh, what could I start YouTubing about and make some money with, but I've been mainly a consumer. But here I am making this video. Never guessed I would be here. So the position that I now find myself in has been by far the greatest fear that I ever had of what would happen to me. So when I was one of Jehovah's Witnesses, being in this position was always my greatest fear. Who is this video for? This video, in my mind, is primarily for friends and family and everyone else. But mainly for friends and family. It's for myself. It's been therapeutic to write things out, to talk to myself, and even to do this, this is kind of my first time doing this video and attempting to post it and everything. I think about those who may be going through a similar experience, and this could help them. But this is primarily for friends and family that I've had for many, many years. They have made up my entire social structure for the last 26 plus years. And I want to share with you, my friends, my family, why I left our religion. And when I say family in this video, I'm talking about my in-laws, because that's mainly my family. I walked away from friends decades ago, and family kind of, set them aside. Now, after my grandma passed, you know how you'll have someone in the family, like the matriarch, and they will kind of be like the glue for the families to be together. Well, when my grandmother passed, that we kind of fizzled as a family, but we still kept in touch, and I still reached out. But after I became a witness, increasingly I just distanced myself from them. And so when I say family, anyway, that sidebar was just to explain. When I say family, I'm typically talking about my wife's family, my in-laws, mom and dad, right? Brother, sister, all them. For your family and friends, for your comfort and safety, I want you to know that I'll let you know when I'm about to share information that you may have never heard of before, and you may not be ready to hear at this time. So I'll give you a time marker. I'll say it verbally, and then you can kind of check out if you don't want to hear that. To my friends and family, I love you very much. I miss you very much. I'll always be here for you. My door is always open to you. You know how to reach me 7 different ways. I'm the same person. I've just stepped away from a religion, but I'm still a Myri, for better or for worse, I guess. I have the same feelings for the brothers that I served with, the elders that I served with, and the ministerial servants. But as I think about the elders, it was a pleasure serving with you. I learned a lot. I miss all of you. I hope you and all of your families are doing well. I understand the brothers I had to work with at the very end. I understand why you had to disfellowship me and shun me, because I did those same things to others for many years when I believed as you do. So I don't agree with it, but I understand. I wanted to talk a little bit about my beginnings as a witness. I guess you could say my origin story. What is my origin story in this religion? Well, I was not raised as a JW, but looking back and being honest with myself, I would say that I was as close as you can get without being raised in it. And that's important. That has become important to me because I never quite acknowledged that until recently. I kind of thought, no, I was never a witness. I did this on my own, sort of thing. Maybe it was a kind of a pride thing. I don't know. But my grandma was JW, and from a young age, just like JWs do at a young age, she would talk to me about paradise. And it sounded nice. It sounded like a dream waiting to come true. You know, I was a little tyke. And she would talk to me about petting the lions. She would talk to me about hanging out with these wild animals without the fear. You know, things that you would talk to a little kid about. And I loved my grandma. I still miss her dearly. I would say that I was about as close to my grandma as I was to my own mom. We always lived next door to each other, whether it was in the projects or in apartments, like government housing apartments. We always were side by side. Grandma was like right there, a couple doors down, right? And that was vital for me. When I was little, probably 5 years old, my grandma had her best friend, Hazel Bowers, I believe her name. I know the first name was Hazel. I think the last name was Basil. Bowers, not Basil. Bowers, Hazel Bowers. She would study with me. So I'm like 5, I'm this little guy. She would share her faith with me. My grandma also had Hazel teach me the piano for a while. So my grandma wanted to share her faith with me. And I think my grandma was also just trying to keep me off the streets, even starting young, which was a beautiful thing on her part. But yes, so with Hazel, I remember studying in the that golden colored book, my book of Bible stories, even though I just wanted to play. When they finally got me to sit down and read the stories, I remember being interested, and then having some of my favorite stories like Jonah and the whale. And I had to pay attention because Hazel she would ask them questions at the end, and she would just wait until I figured it out. So she would just wait, and so I had to pay attention. Now, my mom was not a JW, and she never was, and so it was an interesting mix. We celebrated all the holidays. We did all the worldly stuff like that, birthdays, Christmas, all of that. And my dad, on a few occasions, he took me to the neighborhood church. Right, this would be like a Pentecostal church or a Baptist church. But my mom, who raised me, sort of let my grandma steer my mom and steer our spirituality to an extent. At school, I remember not saluting the flag, and maybe even the holiday thing coming up a little bit. But for the most part, I participated in all that and had the birthday parties and everything. But in school, I remember not saying the Pledge of Allegiance, since I had been warned. But in my mind, it was more like a rebellion. You know, I'd be standing there not saying the pledge, looking around at my friends who were saying it, just raising my eyebrows, like, yeah, I don't have to do that. But then sometimes I would do it just to see. As a kid, I thought, what's going to happen if I do this? I didn't know. And I remember I used to get mad at my grandma sometimes because even though my mom wasn't a JW, my grandma would tell my mom not to let me do this or that, and my mom would just go along with it at times. For example, in the projects in Glendale, or as my Hispanic homies would say, Grandel, here in Grandel, Arizona, in the projects, every Sunday morning, a white church bus would come down the street. What was that, Lamar? And this this was an old converted school bus. It would come down the street and it would take all the kids to the church. And when they came home, it wasn't so much church that I wanted to go to necessarily. But when those kids came home and got off the bus, they had those balls of popcorn. They had candy, they had lollipops, they had Tootsie Rolls, all kinds of candy, and I could never go. A couple times I came close when I tried to do it on the hush-hush, but I never got to go. So I used to get irritated at things like that. Again, though, I think I underestimated how close I was to the religion growing up, and I've exaggerated about it that, well, I didn't grow up at JW. I came in. No, but I didn't grow up in it. But then again, I sort of did, if you think about it. And through my teenage years, my grandma was always pushing me to study. And so she had a few different brothers study with me. I can remember me and my mom doing the home but hiding when they came by a lot, right? Witnesses start knocking. You just get quiet. Stand in the hallway. Stay out of sight in case they look through the curtains, right? When I was having a Bible study, man, if that brother was like 1 minute late, I was out of there, right? So I was a teenager. I was a kid. What about when I became a JW, one of Jehovah's Witnesses? So if you fast forward to late 1997, early 1998-ish, I was in a vulnerable place in my life. There's a lot of things that I won't go into detail about, but I was drifting away from my daughter. I had this little girl, beautiful little girl. I was drifting away from her, and that was subconsciously, maybe that was just hitting my heart. I was up to no good. I found myself in trouble often and in and out of dangerous situations, and I started thinking to myself, it's because I'm not serving Jehovah, right? I started thinking, and there was also just this spiritual, right? This hunger that started to go on in me, but I was in a vulnerable place. So I started studying. And then my mom dies on the night of the memorial in 1998. I used to kind of have it in mind what day that was, but I went to the memorial that evening in 1998, and when I came home in the AM, my mom died. Me and my little girl came home from the memorial, and then later on, she passed. And 5 months after that, I was baptized. So again, I was in a vulnerable place. So now I'd like to talk about how I believed. And I would say I have believed this religion completely, 100%. And I've tried to live my life like I believed it. And I did that all the way until I woke up. So I wasn't one of these witnesses who behaves in a way where, or maybe thinks to themselves or says, oh, I don't really believe this, but all my friends and family are here. Nope, I never was like that. I was never in it for the milk and cookies, so to speak. I wasn't in it for the friends. I was in it for God. I was in it for the one who made me, my creator. The benefits, all the benefit, that was wonderful blessings, but that's not why I was there. And so now looking back, yes, I did have doubts about things at times, but at the same time, I wasn't curled up in the fetal position worrying about these doubts. Here's how I thought about doubts that I would come across. I would think to myself, because I studied a lot. I read the Bible. I studied all the publications, but I really read the Bible, and I'm glad I did. But I would think to myself, when I came across those doubts, I'm alone, I'm at home, and I'm studying, reading, praying. I would think to myself, Amiri, who else is preaching? Right? You stand on the street corner, you look north, south, east, west, you look up and down the street, and 99% of the time, you're not going to see people from other religions, but you will see Jehovah's Witnesses, right? Clean. The presentation looks amazing, right? Suit and tie. The wife, the woman has on, she's nicely dressed in the dress. The kids look cute. They're all done up. And I would think, no one else is doing that. And that's good. That was a good visual in my mind and heart. And I would also say to myself, and even as I would speak with other fellow elders, if Jehovah's Witnesses don't have the truth, no one does. No one has it. And I would also think, and again, I'm talking about thoughts I would have when I would have little doubts. And again, these weren't crippling doubts, but they're just doubts, right? I would also think to myself, Amiri, you came off the street and you were doing all this dirt, and these people are holy and they're in Bethel. They're spending day and night working for Jehovah God. They're praying, they're studying, and here you are. You still have these bad thoughts running through your head at times. Just wait on Jehovah and he'll make things clear. And that's how we're taught as witnesses. That's an understanding, that's a phrase or an idiom, whatever you call it. Wait on Jehovah. And so that's what I did. The little doubts I had, I filed those doubts away and continued on. And so while I did have doubts, who doesn't? I still believed, and I still behaved like I believed 100%. And I did that for over 26 years. And then here I was going to talk about, and I'm sorry, I'm following an outline. I'm trying to be as natural as I can, but I did need some notes here. And so here I wanted to talk about my serving, what I did as a witness, how I acted. I would say I started serving as a ministerial servant probably around 2001. And for several years, I served as a ministerial servant. And then I served as an elder for about 15 years. So since around 2001, I've been serving continuously. I just stopped serving as an elder in January of this year. And so I've been serving continuously for a long time. And I've been serving with all my strength, with all my might, with all my belief, with all my power. I had dedicated many, many hours and weekends to RBC, to coordinating meals for the brothers and sisters, to the brothers who were doing the drafting and planning of the new Kingdom Halls during RBC time. I was there helping with that. RBC projects themselves, physically on site, digging ditches all day for new sprinkler systems at Kingdom Hall builds, planting trees, cleaning up, all of that. I've been on numerous seldom worked territory and unassigned territory trips. I've helped plan them. I've planned my own. Actually, the last trip we went on, I planned it, and I led about 20 people. I think we had 19 people total. One had to bow out at the last moment. Led about 20 people to Evergreen, Colorado, beautiful place, to do seldom worked territory. I've worked at the assemblies and conventions. I mean, in every way, I tried to always be in the middle of the congregation and to never be lukewarm. I never wanted to fit that description Jesus talked about being lukewarm. And I think it was David in the Psalms that talked about being in the middle of the congregation. So those things affected me, and I tried to do things in a JW way to follow that direction. In fact, the day I got baptized, September 12th, 1998, Tucson, Arizona, I went directly to the help desk. I think it's called the help desk. And I volunteered for an assignment. And I immediately got an assignment. I ended up guarding the stage, behind the stage. I remember working immediately. As far as the field ministry, I loved the field ministry. I know a lot of you out there are thinking, what is he talking about? But I did. I loved the ministry. I loved sharing God's word with others. It felt like an adventure, walking up and down the streets. I think it scared me to death initially that I made myself like, you are going to figure out how to do this and how to do it without hyperventilating every time you go out, and you're going to enjoy it. And I did. It took me a while to develop, but I like talking too, so it worked out. I did enjoy talking the ministry, especially when people knew their Bible. My favorite was to talk with pastors and people who knew their Bible. And I looked forward to all of the spiritual stuff we did, the assemblies, the conventions, all of that. I regular pioneered with my wife for 1 year. We've been interviewed on the assemblies, had little assembly parts. As I was leaving, I was being given parts at the convention and the circuit assemblies, and I respectfully declined those. And so, as a witness, I know I've gone on and on for some time, but as a witness, I had fun. I can't really complain. I taught these things to my daughter from a young age, and then later to my two sons who came along. And now, looking back, yeah, there was some mental stress that I believe was caused by just the structure of this religion, but I didn't realize that then, right? And so I believed everything, and I believed hard. I believed completely. And so, again, overall, I was happy as one of Jehovah's Witnesses until I wasn't. I was happy as a witness until I wasn't. And I would say I had a pretty good reputation. In the context of being a JW, I would describe myself as rough around the edges just because of my upbringing, right? But I always tried to be real and authentic. Even though that can be hard at times to do in this religion, I didn't like it if I started acting in a way that I felt was not me, right? I thought, oh, I might get to that point at some point, but right now I've got to act the way I am, and I've got to strive to be honest in the things that I do. Now, what about my outlook as one of Jehovah's Witnesses? I mentioned at the beginning, I never thought this would happen to me. I thought that I would be a JW forever. I thought I'd be a JW forever. I had tasted the world and I didn't want to go back. And I thought that I would walk, run, crawl, or drag myself into paradise with my family. The idea of ever leaving this religion, it terrified me. It would mean, because as a witness, it would mean that God Almighty had rejected me, and that was a very desolate and lonely thought. Again, in a million years, I would have never thought that I would be in this position. I would have never guessed it. This position was always, as I said, my worst nightmare. And so what happened? What happened? I would say what happened, I call it the fracture. I call what happened to me the fracture. The fracture was the big crack in my foundation, and it came during the COVID pandemic, like I've realized it has for many. Now, I was scared when the pandemic first hit, but at the same time, I was full of confidence in my religion and was so happy to be in the religion because I thought, this is our time to shine. And I knew my brothers would be neutral. You could see all the craziness going on in the news. And so I was excited. I felt comfortable. Because I thought, the brothers, let's see what they do. Let's see what they do, because you know Jehovah's behind it and it's going to be good, and we're going to be just fine and protected and cozy and perfect, right? And now anyone who knows me, they know that I've been into natural health for some time. And for those of you I haven't seen in many years who may be watching this video at some point, if you remember Amiri from back in the day, I had asthma, right? Still do, way more under control these days, but remember Amiri, asthma, food allergies. I always had my inhaler with me, breathing treatments at home, medications, all types of stuff. So that's like, to me, a whole nother origin story in my life. But anyway, being into natural health for many years, I felt pretty confident in my knowledge in how to deal with the virus. And I was still scared for a bit because this thing was being pumped constantly in the news. And we should never forget what everyone said and did during this time, because it was wild. It was wild. and you would watch the news, and they would show a chart with a red line on it, and it's going up, and then they'd have news scrolling across the bottom, and then they would have a guy, a 15 to 30 second video loop of a guy or a gal in an ICU unit with tubes coming out of them, and this is what you're going to be if you don't listen to what we're saying. So it was wild. It was wild. And so yeah, so that's why I say I was scared in the beginning. And then as elders, when the pandemic hit, that's when we all installed WhatsApp. And then we had everyone in the congregation install WhatsApp. We created our field service groups. We created a thread for just the elders. We created a thread for the entire servant body. And there was, if you remember the pandemic, it was an intense time. If you were still a witness during the pandemic, you know it was a very intense time. And so during the pandemic, when brothers are messaging on WhatsApp, some of them were using all caps, and brothers, this is it. This is it. You know, basically, and when a witness is saying that, they're saying, hey, the Great Tribulation and or Armageddon is coming. This is it. And so me watching the news and then serving as an elder and being on these threads, I was like having panic attacks at time. I had to come into my office, shut the door. I would pray. I would just try to relax. And then when I stopped reading it so much, it was like, okay, I'm good. I'm good. And so during the pandemic, my confidence, my happiness turned into embarrassment. Why? I think it started with the governing body update number 6 in 2021. You can go look. I was a little lazy to go pull all that detail up, but it was the first governing body update, number 6, 2021, pretty sure, where they started pushing an experimental medical procedure, an experimental medical product. And when they first said it, I had no idea like what to even think. It was just like, it was like I didn't understand where I was. I didn't understand what was happening. And then for several months, they went on and they more aggressively pushed an experimental medical procedure, an experimental medical product. And that was just mind-boggling to me. And I'll explain why in a minute. But yeah, so they're pushing this experimental medical product, and it's probably more accurate to call it gene therapy than a vaccine. I hope I can say vaccine on YouTube. But mRNA, this was pretty new. The technology's been around, but in terms of what they were using it for, it was pretty new. And so it's more accurate to say an experimental gene therapy product. Okay? And so when the governing bodies started sounding just like the news, minus the video loop of the guy in the hospital bed on the gurney, when the governing bodies started sounding just like mainstream news and just like the WHO and the World Health Organization and the NHI, is it NIH? The NHI, National Health Institute, and the CDC, I just started to not, something was fracturing, and I didn't know what it was, but as a witness, you internalize, in any turmoil you're having, you internalize it and you say it's because of you. So I just kept thinking it's because of me. It's because of me. And I would even go and I would pray for forgiveness for thinking like this, for thinking differently than the governing body. And not only did they start more aggressively pushing this experimental medical procedure, they started associating, getting this experimental medical procedure with obedience to God. And that's probably when I kind of broke. That was probably like the fracture, because I didn't believe that. And again, I went and prayed. I'm praying to God Almighty for forgiveness for disagreeing with the governing body. And I started writing. I wrote them a letter. At one point, I had a 15-page letter that I never sent. I just wrote because it was therapeutic. But then when Splain came on, and remember, Splain was talking about remaining in the land of the living. And at one point, someone else said this, and I thought, oh, that's interesting. They said it looked like he was going to come out of his chair. Splain was saying, you've got to be in the land of the living, right? So he talks about, the governing body update talks about vaccines. Then they talk about being in the land of the living. Then they talk about obedience to God. But it's done in a way where they have plausible deniability, to where you said, hey, you pushed the vaccine on us. No, we never said that. We never said that. But they did. They did say that. Especially when you consider how one of Jehovah's Witnesses receives that information. And see, after Splain gave that governing body update, our circuit overseer came through right about the same time. And I think this was his first, maybe second visit. And he said the same words that Splain said. So now here Splain's talking to a worldwide audience. The circuit overseer comes. He's talking to a congregation, and he's talking about getting vaccinated over here. And then he moves over here and starts talking about obedience to God, but never completely mingles the two. But a witness knows what he's talking about. As one sister told me, who was adamantly against getting this product when it first came out, when the GB started talking about it, GB, for those of you who aren't witnesses, governing body, when the GB, those are our religious leaders, when the GB started talking about it, that sister changed her mind. She looked kind of broken. She just looked like she was a little confused, but she said, I hear them loud and clear. I know what they're telling me. I know what they're saying. I hear them loud and clear. Okay, so that's the effect that had. And I would say that the governing bodies, when they started talking about this, it had the effect of forming divisions in the congregation. And that's what's, again, my cracks in my foundation, because we are always told, don't do anything to stumble your brothers, right? Don't do anything to cause divisions. And here, before they started talking about the jab, we were on Zoom, right? We were on Zoom for what? At least 2 years. We would talk about it. We would disagree. Some might even argue a little bit, but it was cool. Everybody respected each other. And you know, some people are going to get it, some people aren't. That's fine. But after the governing body started pushing this, they started pushing this, that changed. It polarized things. What happened? The people who are saying, I'm going to wait, this is pretty new, I'm going to wait a couple years, or some were saying, I'm never taking this thing. They got quiet, right? They couldn't talk anymore. And then the ones who were very pro this experimental medical procedure, they started really pumping it even more, right? And that includes even, I would say, at least a couple elders. There was 1, 2, maybe 3 elders, one in particular really pushing this thing and basically looking at everybody and telling people whenever he had a chance, you know what they're telling us to do. You know what to do. Are we going to be obedient? See, those are the things that, and I'm listening to this like, nope, that's not what I'm hearing. That isn't what I'm hearing. So So someone who's still a witness might say, well, those elders were taking it too far. Perhaps, but they had the governing body's backing, right? The governing body decided to choose a side, whereas they had always taught us as witnesses to never push medical procedures or treatments or natural health products or natural health treatments on our brothers and sisters. Am I right? Am I right? Okay, so now the ones who are very pro, they're just talking about it. And when we started going back to the hall to clean the hall and get it ready, this one elder is asking people, are you vaccinated? Okay, are you vaccinated? It turned into this wild thing. And I know in another congregation, when they're on Zoom before and after the meeting, some people were just going to each person in the video montage thing, and are you vaccinated? Are you vaccinated? Are you vaccinated? So that's just wild. I guess it was all new to us, right? But when the GB started pushing it, that's when things changed. And then as an elder, they sent us a private, secret letter. And why do I say private and secret? Because it is private and secret, right? If they don't tell us to read it to the congregation, you're not going to know about it, right? And so for some of you who are married to elders, your elders' wives, your elder husband, he's not supposed to, but he might drop a little hint, or he might say a little something like, oh yeah, they just told us to stop talking about the vaccine. And that's exactly what they did. I think that might have been in September of 2021. I'm not sure. Excuse me. But they sent a letter and basically said, hey, they quoted Romans about obeying the superior authorities, and basically told us to shut up. They said, if you have anything negative if you have anything negative to say against the COVID vaccine, now's the time to stop talking. Now's the time to be quiet. Okay? So that had an effect that is hard to describe. But I would say overall it caused divisions, because now the neutrality was broken. And now if you're watching this and you have never been a witness, you might, if you haven't been in the situation, you won't understand and you won't get the full impact and how heavy this was. But see, when a witness is told, oh, you should do this, they take it as, oh, I have to do this. When they see, and that's the culture. That's one of the layers of being a witness. We have our version of the Bible, right? And then there's that's a layer. That's like, we would call that the foundation. But then there's the magazines. There's the Watchtower and Awake and the books and the literature, right? That's a layer. Okay. Then there's videos. That's another layer. A little bit newer layer. We've had videos for a while, but it's different with the broadcasting. And then there's our culture, right? And tradition. So all these are layers that functions, and those layers that aren't written down, oral, the tradition, the culture, they function as rules for us as witnesses. And so going back, I wanted to go back real quick and talk about how we were trained up until that time for 22 years at that point. I was always taught, and I taught from the platform, never to push medical products, medical treatments, natural health products, natural health treatments on your brothers. And I would say they probably had more of a slant towards against the natural health stuff. Maybe I'm biased, but I say that because a lot of the times it would be in the context of you may be making money off of your brother and you don't want to do that. And I got it. That made sense. You don't want to just, walk into church, walk into a congregation, and just see dollar signs, right? These are your friends. These are your brothers and sisters. But it was a bit much. And so here's an example of how intense that is. Years ago, I was reading a book. Called The China Study by T. Colin Campbell, and I think his son helped him with it. Now that book, it's an amazing book. He's talking about the dangers of meat consumption. And I think what he does is he goes through studies that were already conducted and kind of redoes them. I forget. It's been years since I read the book. But I'm reading this book years ago, The China Study, okay? And it's interesting because, someone else mentioned this book as well. But I'm reading this book, and then I meet up with the fellow elder, like in service or on break on service, and we both start talking about meat, like dangers of eating meat at the time. Now, I'm not telling him I'm reading this book at this moment. I don't say, hey, I'm reading this. We just start talking, and he starts saying, yeah, did you know this about meat and that about meat? And we start talking, and it was like an exciting conversation. And then at one point I said, yeah, I'm reading The China Study. And he starts laughing. He says, a friend just gave me that book. And I'm reading that book. So I'm reading the book, and an elder I serve with is also reading the book. And we're comparing notes, right? I think I was a little further along than him in the book, by maybe a few chapters, and he's over here. We're talking. And at one point, I said something. We were expressing our excitement over the book, but at one point, I said something like, it's like the truth, right? Like when you read it and it makes sense. Okay, now I think that statement, I'm still guessing to this day, I think that statement got me in trouble. But here's what happened. Fast forward, not long, maybe a few days, my fellow elder, he was an older brother. He was older than me, right? He was like a father figure to me. He sits me down, and he sits me down, and he talks to me about that conversation we had about the book, about China Study, and about how excited we were. And his wife had overheard us talking. And now he was sharing with me what his wife said, and he also agreed with her. And what he told me was, this kind of talk can lead to apostasy. So if you're not a witness, Jehovah's Witnesses view apostasy as those who leave the religion. Those are considered apostates. I personally think it would be better to call them JW apostates, or have a very specific JW term, because that's not how the Bible describes apostasy. But anyway, my fellow elder, father figure, sits me down, tells me, hey, this kind of talk can lead to apostasy. And I felt bad because I never wanted to be responsible for stumbling someone, right? You read the Bible, Jesus warns you about stumbling someone. I never wanted to do that. And then I was kind of confused. He never told me exactly what it was I said, but that thought I shared with you. I think that was probably the most excitable thing I said in that conversation. And then I remember also being a little bothered, like, why is this such a big deal? But then again, I always tried to do the right thing, and so I just went along with it, and I calmed myself down. So that whole long story is to show you how sensitive Jehovah's Witnesses are to their fellow brothers and sisters, anyone pushing medical treatments, pushing medical products, right? Medical procedures, medical anything on their brothers and sisters. We've had parts on the assemblies about it. One in particular was actually really funny. So this isn't a little thing. This isn't just kind of a little side. This is a big thing. And so with every witness in the world having that in their mind and heart, the pandemic comes along, And I felt like the governing body just abandoned all of that stuff that they told us and started pushing an experimental medical product on us. And that was mind-boggling. That was just, I still can't believe it, right? We have what's the little booklet called where, for the safety? Is it the DC-50? I forget already. I can't remember. But we have a booklet, and we've revised it over time. I think we've had a couple different booklets. We have a booklet on how to be safe. And it goes, some even say, yeah, this goes way over. This is a little over the top, but you feel good in doing it because you're like, well, this is the standard God would use, right? So we're going to be extra safe. And so if you're in the Kingdom Hall doing Kingdom Hall cleaning, and you're going to change the light bulb or you're going to change out the air vent, you get a ladder. I think you might have to put on a vest, maybe not, but they'd like you to have it on. But at the very least, you get a ladder and you have to get another person. There's like an entire protocol. And so we would joke about it, right? Like, hey, I'm gonna change your light bulb. I need 3 brothers over here holding the ladder and 1 to catch me. Just silly, goofy stuff like that. But that just shows you the level of, hey, we got to be up to God's standards, right? The Old Testament talks about building a parapet to keep your brother safe, and in spirit, we're trying to follow that. But then here comes an experimental medical procedure, and the governing body seem to abandon all of that. And the only reason I can think of now is, for one, the religion is a 501c3, right? So they have tax exempt status. And I think nothing's free. Nothing's free. There's no free lunch. And I think they had to follow direction. At least to an extent during that time. And no doubt, I'm going to give the governing body the benefit of the doubt and say that they thought they're doing what was in the best interest, right? This is for your own good. They thought they were doing it in the best interest of everyone, right? That's what I'm going to go with right now. And so I have, like Bob Marley says, I have so much things to say right now, so much things to say, but I'm going to try to move on from that. But when the governing body started talking to us like that during the pandemic, the governing body updates, to me it started sounding like a public service announcement for the pharmaceutical companies. Like the first 5 to 7 minutes was like a PSA for these companies. And I mean, that's when I started writing. That's when I ended up writing a 4-page. Instead of the 15-page letter I wrote like a 4-page bulleted, 3-page bulleted letter and sent it to them, and then ended up talking with the circuit overseer at length about all of this. It was an interesting conversation. And so when they started talking to us like that, again, it felt manipulative. It felt insincere. To me, it was dangerous and it was ill-informed. It was like finally noticing the manipulation in a magic trick. You can't unsee it. I'll give you this example. I remember being a kid and going to see a decent magic show for the first time. And that would have been at my school. That would have been in Glendale. That would have been at Unit 3, Harold W. Smith. And I was probably in 3rd grade, and we went into I'm a little guy. We walk into the cafeteria. We sit down at the benches. The lights go out, and then some kind of like black lights, softer lights come on. And this magician comes out, right? He's got the cape or the mantle, whatever you call it. He's got the hat. He's got the wand, right? Old school. He was like, it was new then, but he's a magician. And I was just, the feelings of wonder that I had, the feelings of like, wow, this is incredible. And he did all these magic tricks, right? Pulled a rabbit out of his hat. He cut the person in half. He did all these tricks, had stuff up his sleeve. And I just remember being enamored with that. I didn't like get all into magic myself, but I thought, wow, this is really cool. Now, fast forward, There was a show, and this would have been the 80s. It was like a 20 minutes. Oh, wait, 20 or 60 minutes. And this guy, and some of you might remember this guy was going to drop the T on how all these magicians did their tricks. And I remember at least hearing that all these magicians were super upset that this guy was going to do this. And I remember watching it and learning how they did the trick. And I thought, oh, wow, I was just eating it up. But after that, and I might have been around a teenager at that time, but after that, the magic just wasn't the same. It just wasn't the same. I still liked it, but I thought, oh, okay, I see what he's doing. Yeah, he had that thing up his sleeve. He pushed it up his sleeve. He pulled it from his sleeve, whatever. To me, the same thing happened with the governing body. When I felt manipulated with how they were talking to us, it was like seeing the manipulation and a magic trick, and I couldn't unsee it. And so now I open the Watchtower to study for meeting on Sunday, and I see manipulation, and I'm like, well, why are they saying things like this? Why do they say it like that? Why not just say this? Or they're telling us about some reference, but they don't give us the reference. Why don't they give us the reference? And then I copy paste that quote they give us without the reference, copy paste it into the browser, and like, oh, they came from Bible Hub. Start reading. Oh, okay, well, they probably didn't want us to read all the rest of that. So those things started to really bother me, and I did start to become very critical of the governing body at that time. Another thing, they started talking about how we should not follow or believe in conspiracy theories. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, please, in the comments below. I've never said that before. In the comments below. So, in all my time in this religion, they've never brought up conspiracy theory. They just don't talk about that. Just like they don't talk about the subconscious, which is interesting. So, and even if you look in the literature, like if you go on Watchtower Online or the JW Library app or jw.org, I don't think they talk about conspiracy theory pre-pandemic. Okay? And in the Bible, from memory, I think there's maybe 2 occurrences of the word conspiracy. And I think one was with Athaliah. Remember, she was a wicked queen, right? Again, correct me. I'm not taking the time I'm going off memory on a lot of this, and maybe I'll come back later. But please correct me. But I think Athaliah used the word conspiracy. And what was interesting about Athaliah is she was bad, right? She was bad. And when they finally came to get her, when her evil deeds caught up with her, what did she yell? Conspiracy, right? So the bad guy, the bad girls yelling conspiracy toward the good people who are trying to do good. So during the pandemic, all of a sudden, the governing body is telling us not to believe in conspiracy theories. Again, that just fractured. These things are just blowing my mind. You have no idea. And you might be thinking, oh, this is no big deal. Well, be quiet, Amiri. But for me, it's a big deal. It was blowing my mind. Okay? And I'll explain why. So, and they also came out with a couple articles, right? Like, I think one was protect yourself from misinformation. And if you really look at the picture, because now Jehovah's Witnesses, pictures are everything. And even the governing body tells us, study the pictures. Okay? And we do that in our Watchtower lesson. We will spend, when we do Q&A, we do a question and answer during the Watchtower study, we'll spend a few minutes talking about a picture and kind of drawing things. Oh, yeah, well, you notice the clock on the wall, it's 11, and outside the window, it's nighttime. But you can tell he's still studying his Watchtower, even though he's tired and it's late at night. we do that all day. And so when the governing body came up with that picture for protect yourself from misinformation, I studied it. And you could see the little moon landing, like a little moon landing thing for that conspiracy. You could see like the Twin Towers for that conspiracy. They had a little COVID looking virus thing for that conspiracy, right? And then they go on to talk about, and then even in videos, don't believe in conspiracy theories. And then we had the video, it might have been one of the updates where that family, I believe it's a family in another country, not the United States, and they're talking about, they're sitting on the couch, husband, wife, 2 or 3 kids, and the husband is talking about, he was saying at first we were listening to all the conspiracy theories about the vaccine. And now I'm thinking, and other people agreed, like, well, since when was mainstream saying that the vaccine was bad? It didn't happen. By and large, it didn't happen. The only time I remember that happening is, I think as Trump was leaving office, as his term was ending, he started really talking up the idea that he had brought this vaccine to the people, to the Americans, right? And I remember at that time, briefly, people, maybe like a Pelosi, maybe like a Kamala Harris, started saying, well, and others, and there's others, I'm not taking that vaccine. If that's from him, I'm not taking it. But then he was out of office shortly after that. They brought in, they warp speeded this in, right? They brought it in, and that kind of went away from the news. That evaporated, okay? Warp speed, by the way, right? So they used this term from fictional series, from like Star Trek, right? And then that's how they create the new medical products. So just keep these things in mind. So they're telling us not to believe in conspiracy theories, and I'm looking at all of this. Again, I'm a pretty big reader. Like right now, I'm probably reading 2 or 3 physical books, and then audio books. I'm always reading a couple audio books, videos, podcasts. I like learning. I like learning about natural health treatment, what's going on in my world, right? And so here they're saying don't believe in conspiracy theories. Now, Jehovah's Witnesses, my friends, my family, I have a question for you about not believing in conspiracy theories. And I have some thoughts there. As you can tell, I have a lot of thoughts. So much things to say. So, as witnesses, as Christians, you believe and you go door to door and preach that there is an invisible, superhuman spirit creature called Satan the devil, who spends every waking moment trying to convince people that God Almighty doesn't exist. Not only that, this invisible superhuman spirit creature, he doesn't need to sleep, apparently. He doesn't need to eat. So he can focus, hyper-focus on his task at thwarting humans, okay? Not only that, you believe that he goes even further, and even though he's invisible, he goes even further to hide his identity from man, right? He doesn't want man to know, oh, this is the devil, right? So he transforms himself into an angel of light. So he does all of this. Not only that, you believe from the Bible that there are thousands, maybe millions of other fallen angels with Satan who are also superhuman, invisible, don't need sleep, don't eat, and all they do is they go all around the earth and they're just thwarting the faith of believers. You believe that, right? Well, if you believe that, how at the same time in your mind, and this question is for the governing body too, how in your mind can you also believe that no people on the earth are conspiring against others? That just doesn't make sense. I can't even comprehend that. But again, I've always loved a good conspiracy, right? My growing up, my life experience, I've seen enough where I understand man's broken. Doesn't matter if they're poor. It doesn't matter if they're rich. People can be corrupt for all different reasons. For women, for drugs, for ego, everything. So that's just a little sample of why it is mind-boggling that the governing body would start talking about, conveniently during the pandemic, not believing in conspiracy theories. And then again, the witnesses just follow that. The witnesses just follow, don't believe. Oh, that's a conspiracy theory. Yeah, we heard that on Zoom, during Zoom service. Oh, that's a conspiracy. An elder's wife's telling a brother, that's conspiracy theory, right? And then I get a call from an elder asking about that brother. Do you think he's an apostate? This is like real life stuff. Just what is going on? What is going on? Now, I've been rambling on, and that whole ramble there, that whole rant was about the fracture. Just a little bit, and there's a lot more, but this was kind of like the culmination. And that was like what happened, the latter part of what happened. But what was the straw that broke the camel's back? The straw that broke the camel's back was when Anthony Morris, Brother Morris, was no longer one of the governing body members. And we had that, remember, we had the message pop up on our website. I think it popped up on the app, on the JW Library app. I can't quite remember. And it wasn't up that long, right? And we were like, I was like, what? Because again, this is during the pandemic. All these things are happening. New governing body members were being selected maybe after Morris left. But Morris is gone, and we're trying to figure it out. So I'm talking to fellow elders, and we're just dissecting that message like, oh, well, you know what? They said brother, so he must have not gotten in trouble, because that was one idea. Oh, he got in trouble for something. No, well, they called him brother, so he's still a brother. And maybe he's just sick. He's just sick. Or his wife got real sick. Maybe he had to go take care of her. Okay. But those things didn't make sense, because you wouldn't, just like an elder, governing body members are elders, right? With this special privilege as we're taught. Well, just because an elder gets sick, you don't rip his privileges away. That would be cruel, wouldn't it? That would be unloving. So that didn't make sense. And so, as odd as it sounds, and it's hard for me to even believe this, even though it's my mind, Anthony Morris getting removed was kind of like the last straw. It was like the butterfly that landed on the leaf on the hill, and it caused the tornado. I don't know. And that was tough. And here's why it bothered me. I've got two boys. And during the pandemic, they were about 6 and 9. Okay? And as witnesses, when things like this happen, we believe it's the end of the world. We are taught. That's what we start pumping. We're able to keep calm, but we have this excitement about us that this could be the start of the Great Tribulation, like the Bible talks about, and then Armageddon, and then we're going to be in paradise. It's going to get tough, but it's going to get real good, right? So Anthony Morris is gone, and why was I bothered by this specifically? I was bothered because they never told me as an elder why he left. And I know it might sound petty, And it even sounds a little petty when I say it, because I'm nobody special. But here's why it bothered me. My boys at the time were about 6 and 9. And I take my children at least twice, once during the pandemic, but before either of them are 10 years old, I sat down with them at least twice, and in language they could understand, I let them know that Daddy could someday, because I'm, again, as a witness, I'm trying not to get too excited, but I'm thinking in the back of my mind, Armageddon is about to kick off. Okay? So I'm telling these little kids, these little chubby-cheeked, cute boys in front of me with just beautiful fire in their eyes, right? They're hanging off Daddy's every word. And I'm telling them that Daddy might have to go to jail at some point because we have the truth and because of our faith, right? And I probably told them too much, but I tried to just do it in a way they could take. I just didn't want them. I just thought I kept looking at them thinking, what if I'm gone all of a sudden? I want them to have something in their minds to chew on, right? So I sit these little guys down and I tell them that Daddy could be taken to jail. I tell them that Daddy could even lose his life, but you don't have to worry about that because we have paradise and Jehovah would raise Daddy back from the dead. Okay? So now, and then also, as witnesses, we're trained, we should be ready to give our life up for one another. So at the Kingdom Hall, I'm thinking, hey, if someone comes in and starts shooting, I'm going to, as a brother, my sister, this 94-year-old sister who might only have 2 months to live at her age, I'm going to jump in front of the gun and take a bullet for my sister. Right? That's how I live. Now, I never had to do it. I hoped I had always had real faith to do the right thing. But that's how I behaved. That's how I thought. And now with all of that, the governing body won't tell me, an elder who's helping take the lead in the congregations, why my fellow elder is no longer an elder anymore. And that really rubbed me the wrong way. And you could say it was selfish. Maybe it was selfish. I'm only human. And so how did that break the camel's back? Well, that's when I went to Google and I started punching in Anthony. And I wouldn't click on anything. Not at first. I wouldn't click on any links. I started punching in Anthony Morris. Anthony Morris no longer serving. Anthony Morris governing body. And what I would do is, you know how Google or Bing, they give you get like 1, 2, maybe 3 sentences of the material. I guess I was hoping to see the reason in those couple of sentences, like, oh, Anthony Morris was removed because of this. Okay, so I just had this burning curiosity, but I was too afraid to push the links, to click the links. Why? Excuse me. If you're not one of Jehovah's Witnesses, or you never have been, we are taught that any information that's outside of our information ecosystem is not reliable, and in some cases not safe. And if it's from apostates, that is people who were witnesses but now are no longer witnesses, it's outright dangerous. It's almost like demonic, right? And it's twisted because they had the truth, they had this absolute truth, and now they've decided to go against it. It's almost the same thing as what Satan did. And so I came to realize that I had a very superstitious fear of that because, again, I kept punching in Anthony Morris, but I wouldn't click on anything. Finally, one day, I remember where I was. I was doing my walk around the neighborhood. I remember where I was standing, what the day was like when I decided, when I gave myself permission to click on the link. And the way I did that is I started thinking, what is an apostate? And what came to mind was, and I know this sounds nuts, but what came to mind was like, oh, an apostate, that's someone who's like basically possessed by the devil, and just they're bad, they're dangerous, and so I had, when I started mentally, I had never done this mental exercise before, but when I started doing that, I realized that, man, this is superstitious. Like this doesn't fully make sense, even though it still kind of made sense. But it's strange because Jehovah's Witnesses pride themselves on being very logical, right? Just like Spock from Star Trek. Logical, illogical. The witnesses pride themselves on being logical. 1 + 1, A + B = C. Everything has to fit. Well, this thought about apostates, I started to understand that wasn't logical. And basically I was trying to give myself a reason, an excuse, justification, to permission to click on these links because I wanted to know. And so here I am, friends. I click on this. I decide I'm going to click on this link. I had seen a few. There was one I wanted to click on. It was probably the first on the top or whatever. Now, my friends, my family, as I went to click on this link, and I'm not going to talk about what I saw. I'll warn you when I'm going to talk about information. I'm taking you to that point. As I was about to click on that link, my heart was pounding. I was sweating. My palms were sweaty. I was like breathing heavy, like hyperventilating. And I'm thinking to myself, and I'm realizing something's wrong. This is not normal. This is not normal. I'm a man in his 40s, and I'm just going to look at some information, and I'm hyperventilating. I'm having a panic attack. My heart's pounding. I'm sweating. Okay? And then I clicked on that. And I didn't find the reason. But I will say at this point, friends, family, that other Jehovah's Witnesses, if you're still here at this point, which we're at We're at 1 hour and 12 minutes. You have some stamina if you're still here. But this is very therapeutic for me. So I'm going to keep going. But friends, family, JWs that are still here, here's where I'm going to talk about information that you may have not ever heard, and you may not want to hear it. You may not be ready and in a place to hear it. So please, you can always stop or shut it off now and come back at a later time if and when you're ready to watch. So, and we're at about 1 hour and 13 minutes, and I don't think I'm going to edit. I'm just going to throw it out there, as painful and somewhat cringy as it might be. I've been wanting to do this for a long time, and I keep putting it off, like, I got to get this equipment. I got to get my room set up like this. It's never going to happen. I wanted to do this back in March, and so I just wanted to get it done. So anyway, now I wanted to talk about the other things, more detailed things that I came across after clicking that link with Anthony Morris that caused me to, ultimately be in this position where I'm no longer a JW. So I click on this link. Excuse me. I click on this link, and I read something. It might have been out of Japan. I don't remember, but there was no real detail there. It was saying, it might have mentioned Brother Morris, but there was no detail there. Okay? And so that was kind of a bummer. I was kind of disappointed. And I'll say this, speaking of Anthony Morris, Anthony Morris was by far my favorite. Now, I know others not super excited about him, and I get it, I understand it, but for me, I always liked Anthony Morris, and he was my favorite. Why? Because he seemed real. And maybe it was because all the other parts of his life that I kind of identified with. For one, he had children. He had been in the military, right? He had been in the world. So that kind of resonated with me. And he would talk straight, right? Sometimes too straight, right? And even as witnesses, sometimes you're like, oh, okay, here goes Brother Morris, you know. You always follow the instructions, but you realize, okay, he's kind of going a little, he's really pushing it. But I always liked it because I'm not a smart person, and I can't always read in between the lines. Sometimes I need people to say, Myri, listen, do this. And that's how he was. And so that's why I always liked Brother Morris the most. The rest were fine too, you know, when I was a witness, but that was it. So anyway, I see another link, and now, as you know, if you're in ExJW, now the curiosity, the fear is still there, trembling maybe, but the curiosity is starting to grow, that appetite. And I clicked on a link, and I don't even remember what I watched, but I just remember watching it. I didn't want to read anything. I had read, and I'll tell these other stories later, but I wanted to see people's face. I wanted to look at them. I wanted to see their demeanor. I wanted to see how their body was moving. I wanted to understand if they were telling me the truth, or if these apostates out here were just drawing me in, just lying to me. Because I knew something wasn't right. My dashboard, my dials, my controls, my instruments are just spinning out of control. Something's not right? And so I watched the video. But as I watched that first video, I remember having my finger and just hovering over the X button, right? Like as soon as they, you know, if they started saying something crazy, I was going to exit out and close it. And a couple times I did, and maybe even stopped it, but then went back. And I also did it on private mode. I used the private browser viewing tab in Google and Edge for up until literally just a couple months ago. And, you know, just so that stuff wouldn't be in my history, right? So the next video after that was JT and Lady C at ExJW Critical Thinkers. And again, I'm watching, and I've got my finger on the X button because I'm thinking, okay, as soon as he starts reciting incantations and and spells, I'm going to close it. As soon as he starts summoning the demons or his eyes start twirling, I'm closing it. Okay? And that never happened. And JT and Lady C were very calm, and then they had guests on, right? They were very calm. They weren't cursing. They were just reasoning on things. And I was even laughing as he's talking, and I was getting mad that I was laughing, but what he was saying was true, because I'm like, oh yeah, we said that as elders, right? You sit around the fire having a beer, you know, and you start letting loose a little bit. And so it's hard to describe what was happening to me. Of course, I was having this awakening, this waking up, but I'm thinking to myself, what is happening? What is happening? These apostates who have left the organization are supposed to be the most blasphemous, evil, vile, Satan-like people on the planet. And here, this third link I clicked, watch the second video I'm watching, this guy's just calm and smiling and laughing and seems happy. And that was very powerful, but it was very confusing. Like, what's happening? What's happening? This doesn't jive with what I've been taught as a witness. And so the rest is sort of history. There's many, I watched many, I didn't wait too long. I started watching many videos, and I would go back and rewatch. Sometimes I'd listen at 2x speed and then, okay, go back, slow it down, and keep listening, because that's how I operate. I have to take in information. I know some others out there, ExJWs, they say, well, you know, I did my own research, and And then I never looked at apostate information until I was already gone or years later. Well, I started looking right away. I gave myself permission because the fracture already happened during the pandemic. Something was broken. Something was broken. And I realized that. Now, what I came across is I came across the Australian Royal Commission. And I had heard a little bit of the Australian Royal Commission just as I started watching the videos. And I tried to stop watching the videos, but it's like junk food. You know how you're like, okay, I'm going to diet. I want to lose like 5 pounds. So I'm not going to eat those chips. And then, late at night, like, okay, I'm going to eat 2 chips, right? And then before you know it, the bag's gone. You're just like, you got crumbs everywhere. That was me. I'm like, okay. I even started talking to my wife, like, okay, I'm going to stop. I'll stop. But then I would just go back to it, start watching, okay? So I found out about the Australian Royal Commission, and I even saw a little clip of Jeffrey Jackson, governing body member Jeffrey Jackson, basically misleading and lying under oath, right? I later saw him swear on the silver sword on the gray latest edition New World Translation Bible. But at the time, I found out about the Australian Royal Commission, and I found out about the near 10-year affiliation with the United Nations. But I decided not to check it out for myself. I decided not to dive deep because I was already losing steam, and I realized if I research this now and find it all out, I'm gonna come to a grinding halt. And I was at a place in my life where I needed to keep going, and that's where I became, even though I didn't admit it until recently, I became PMO, basically. Physically in, mentally out is what that stands for. And so, and I start talking to my wife, and I tell my wife, I have come across some things, and I just couldn't help it. The vaccine issue was really bothering me. I've come across these things, and I'm not going to look at them until Grandma passes. Now, we were living together with my grandmother-in-law, beautiful woman, and she passed last year. She was 98. Okay, talk about longevity. But she was a witness, and I didn't want to cause. She was already bedridden, and we were taking care of her. I didn't want to cause any turmoil, so I told my wife that I would wait until she passes to do that research. But I did also tell my wife, I said, if these things are true, I don't think I can remain in this religion. And she seemed to understand at the time. And so fast forward a little bit, Grandma passes, and within 2 weeks I pick up my research, and I watched, I think, 23 plus hours of the Australian Royal Commission. I went to the official transcripts and spot checked, especially the highlights and stuff. And it just left a knot in my stomach. And, again, his famous line where he's asked whether or not he believes they're the only representative of God's people. And he said, no, that would be presumptuous. And I even had a fellow elder. I had elders tell me, well, he didn't lie. Okay. Well, that's witness speak again. I guess you could say he didn't lie, but I've never taught that from the platform. I have never taught that in the ministry. Now, we're careful with our words, even lawyer-like at times, but I've never gotten on the platform, and I've never taught at someone's door or at a bus stop or in a supermarket or hotel, wherever I was finding people. I've never told them that, it'd be presumptuous of us to think that we're the only people God is using, or the governing body is the only people God is using. So before you say, if you're still with us, if you're still with me, friends, family, Jehovah's Witnesses, before you say that he didn't lie, think the entire thing through. And this is when I was still an elder, and I took all this information to my elder body, and we had a discussion. We sat in a circle at the front of the Kingdom Hall and talked these things out. They didn't let me talk a whole lot. But I asked them, I said, okay, if I could take Brother Jackson's words, our very own governing body, Jeffrey Jackson, if I could take his words and just start using them regularly, integrating them into my comments during Watchtower, my comments during the midweek meeting parts, when I had the treasures part or the digging for gems part, if I started using this comment, or during my public talks and any parts I had on the platform, if I started saying that, would it be okay? So I'm sitting there with an elder body of about 11 people, and I asked them, would that be okay? And you could see 2 or 3 heads shaking. No. And what did I say? I said, what if I just started saying, friends, it would be presumptuous of us to think that we are the only people God is using on this planet. Friends, it would be presumptuous of us to say that the governing body are the only people that God is using on this planet. That's what Brother Jeffrey Jackson said. I agree, he didn't lie, because I believe him. But that's not what we're taught as witnesses. And we're not allowed to teach that from the platform. I have never, and again, I'm right. I'm right. If I'm wrong, just start saying that, and let's see how long it takes before you get pulled into the back room by the elders. Okay? Friends, it would be presumptuous of us. And he went on, if you keep watching, I watched it all. He went on, he basically kind of threw a bunch of our beliefs kind of to the curb when you listen to what he's saying. And so, what is it? Why the tricky tongue? And see, that broke me too, the Australian Royal Commission, the ARC, but it just confirmed what I was, the fracture that already happened. I just thought, oh gosh, I was not hoping to find this. I was not expecting to find the ARC or the UN thing or all these other things. No, not at all. I knew nothing about any of these things. Okay? And so then to have my fellow elders, 11 other elders, and my family and friends, and I shared with the elder body, and then with some family and some friends, not everybody, but the ones I shared with, for them to say, well, he wasn't lying, he's right. Okay, well, start saying that at the meetings and see what happens. The closest I've gotten to that idea, I would say this. And by the way, if I was under oath, especially at the time, it would have been difficult, but I would have said, yes, we do believe that. And I would have tried to explain myself, right? So as Jeffrey Jackson's answering, I'm thinking about how I would answer. And it was different. What Jeffrey Jackson was saying compared to what I thought that I would say is, I would have said something like, Your Honor, I know this might be hard for people to understand, and they no doubt will probably not believe it, but we do believe that we are the only people that God is using on this earth, because I've preached that in the ministry. Now I soften it and I use very kind words, and I don't try to attack people's religion, but when it comes down to it, I would tell people that we have the truth. Even the religion, what do we call ourselves? We say we're in the truth, right? And so I kind of got off track. But yeah, he went on. He disavowed a number of our beliefs, and that was shocking. And then the testimony of the other elders, the Watchtower lawyers, the branch committee members was just, it was cringy at times. At times it was okay, but at other times it was like they lacked this self-awareness. That there was something they just weren't getting. Like they couldn't read the room. Okay? And yeah. Oh, that's what I was going to say. The closest that I've gotten to what Brother Jackson said under oath during the Australian Royal Commission is I've said something like this from the platform. I've said, friends, at the end of the day, God is the judge. Jehovah's the judge, and we don't know. Right? We need to be, and that I would say I'm, at least up until the time, I was one of the fewer brothers, elders, that would talk like that. Others would talk very, very confident on the side of, no, it's just us. But I had enough experience to where I'm like, we better be careful about what we're claiming. I started to think that. Anyway, then I find out about our near 10-year affiliation with the United Nations. And I was always taught, again, I was baptized in 1998, and I was taught that we want nothing to do with the disgusting scarlet-colored wild beast of Revelation, that is, the United Nations. So for 4 years, I think we were members, we had this affiliation with the DPI group, Department of Public Information. We had to agree to their charter. We had to agree to the UN's charter. We had to agree to the charter of the DPI. Go and research what those charters are. Jehovah's Witnesses, I invite you, just go and research what those charters are. Remember, the truth does not mind being questioned. It's okay, right? But now, on the other hand, a lie doesn't like to be challenged. And so, for years, and you can, by the way, Jehovah's Witnesses, you can find this information on the UN's website. You don't have to go to some dark alley, some dark apostate alley and get some dirty thumb drive, and there's rats running around and it's scary and sketchy. No. Just go to the UN's website and dig around a little bit, and you'll find the letter, you'll find the information that'll at least give you a clue, like, interesting. Okay? So for 4 years, while 98, 99, 2000, for about 3+ years, while I was preaching this about the United Nations, we were still an affiliate. That's mind-boggling. When I talked with my fellow elders, I told them, brothers, I feel like a fool. I knew none of this. And one elder, he was the newest elder on the body, he said he knew about this United Nations thing. What? I said, you knew? Like, I never heard you say anything. Like, I never heard this. This is why I'm talking about it. I just found out about this. Okay? So for years, I spoke to people at the door, bus stops, supermarkets, wherever we went. If we were doing seldom work territory and I was out in Nebraska somewhere in the middle of some cornfield, I would talk to them about this. And especially, we were pretty fiery as Jehovah's Witnesses against the United Nations, right? Because we believed that they were the disgusting thing of that Revelation talks about, that Jesus talked about, right? Correct me where I'm wrong. I might make some mistakes in here, but that's not my intention. My intention, and I think you understand, especially if you're still witnesses, we were taught the UN's bad. The UN was basically this imitation, this false kingdom that Satan was setting up in place of God's kingdom, right? We were taught as witnesses, we don't want anything to do with the United Nations. It would literally be, we talk about pulling a lollipop out of the gutter. It would literally be like a lollipop on dog poo in the gutter. Would you grab that and wipe it off and eat it? No, right? So, yeah, it was very clear what our attitude as witnesses should be toward the UN. We didn't just make this up, right? And somewhere someone said that, I think the witnesses might have responded that they needed a library card, but that turned out not to be true. And when you look at all the timelines and you look at the Guardian article calling out the organization for the affiliation, then days later the organization pulls out, it's just so suspect. And it just hurts your heart. And, one of the biggest problems, here's the thing, Jehovah's Witnesses, my friends, my family, if this information would have been if it would have been in our information ecosystem, I would have calmed down. I would have had much less of a problem. But because it was hidden and it seemed like a lie of omission, it really bothered me. Because I carefully went back to the literature. I went to the JW Library app. I went to Watchtower Online, right, our library, wol.jw.org. I went to jw.org. I kind of peeked a little bit on our videos, and I knew nothing was there. I have followed all of those videos most all of those videos since inception, right? Since like 2013 or whatever. And so it wasn't there. The only place I really didn't look, I might have checked once, I don't remember, but I'll say I didn't look. The main place I didn't look was the CD-ROM, which is basically I think it's a download from the website now. I didn't look on the CD-ROM, but everywhere else it wasn't there. So the Australian Royal Commission, the United Nations affiliation, it wasn't there. And by the way, the ARC, I mentioned I was bothered about some of the testimony. Well, when you look at the content, this was for 1,000+ CSA cases over a 20-year period, right? And they even interviewed victims. It was horrendous, and it was just shocking. But I can't find this information anywhere in our information ecosystem. I can't find any apologies. I can't find anything. And that is just so suspicious. That again, cracks in the foundation, and these are just further cracks, more things just wrong. Now, I also, what happened as I started to wake up, as soon as I started to wake up, all of these little doubts that I talked about earlier, you'd have these little doubts, and I'd shelve them because I thought, well, these other men are way more spiritual than me. So I'd file it away, wait on Jehovah. As soon as I started waking up, all these little doubts that I had, they came rushing in. It almost seemed like supernaturally. It was like my mind was like, okay, here's this belief. What do you think about this? Okay, here's this belief. Examine this, research this. Okay, here's this one. Okay, next in line. It just kept going and going and going. And it came rushing in. So every belief that is unique to Jehovah's Witnesses, I allowed my mind, I gave my mind and heart permission to start scrutinizing and examining them. And so obviously I have several issues with the doctrine. Now, do I think everything's bad? I don't. I would be lying if I say I didn't benefit some as a witness, right? But there was also problems with the religion. There were things that I didn't benefit from. There were things that did hurt me, right? If you're controlling people that isn't how we were designed. That's not how we were made to operate. And that in and of itself, even if someone's just working through it and they seem fine, that's not right. That's not right. And I would ask you this, witnesses, those who are still witnesses, excuse me, how do I put this? What external source of information would you agree to examine and trust if someone asked you to prove whether or not you were in a high control religion, or which also they'll say a cult? I know that might be hard to hear, but let's just say a high control. What external source of information would you trust to help you determine whether or not you are in a high control group? You're at the door and someone says, well, are you guys a cult? You say no. Are you sure? Are you guys a high control group? And you say no. Well, and they want you to prove it. Well, I think if you just pull up like the website, the jw.org website, and you're like, well, see, I went to this article here, and the article says that we're not a cult, right? And we have at least a couple articles that say that, right? There's the last one I read, I pulled up, little short article, said basically a little description, and by the way, we're not a cult, we're not a high control group. But I think, brothers, sisters, I think you would agree that wouldn't be fair. Like, that's not legit, right? Like, someone's asking you, hey, are you guys a high control group? I've heard some things. Or maybe you start thinking, are we a high control group? Well, God made you to question. I think we were designed to look for truth, to operate in truth. And so that's normal. Just like if you're trying to hold this beach ball under the water, its natural tendency is to want to find whatever you call it, balance, to get to the top of the water, right? And so I think we do that as people. So maybe you're thinking, well, are we a high control group? Well, if you just go find an article within your own ecosystem that says you're not, that might that self-dosing might help you immediately, like, okay, I feel better. Yeah, that makes sense what they're saying. But I'm asking, is there an external source of information that you would trust to help you determine that? And what would it look like, or who is it? Maybe you have some sources. I would love, if you're a witness and you're on here, and I guess if you're using a secretive name, maybe you can drop the sources you've researched in the comments. I'd love to read it. Believe me, this was a complete nightmare in my life. And when I started, and when I kept looking at all of this apostate information, even months later, even as recent as, I don't know, 6 months ago, several months ago, I'd say several months ago, before this year, even as recent as several months ago, I was hoping that I was wrong. I would keep reading and watching and like, oh, wait, no, what that person said is not right. And I would look at it, well, I didn't hear what he said, or I didn't take it right. I wasn't listening. And because this has been so much of a nightmare, this has turned my life upside down, I was hoping that I was wrong. Even though I had found all this information, and deep down in your gut, you know that it's right? I was hoping it was wrong. And so that's why I ask you, if you have that information, I'd love to see that. So I'm at an hour and 44 minutes, and I wanted to conclude. And I have so much things to say, and I hope that I can make more videos like this. It takes a lot of time and energy and forethought, and I give respect to those who put these videos together, and sometimes they seem to be popping them out like daily. I mean, that's a lot of work, and I'm very thankful to the community because it helped me. It was very therapeutic. I played a lot of your, even some of these sites, channels that had like 0 views, 1 view. I was watching, I was listening to those people. Okay, I would play this. Even now, I play these. My friends and family, they've abandoned me. They're gone. Okay, I will play your videos over and over. It's therapy. It's almost like having an association, right? You see these people and you start feeling like you know them, and you like their style. You laugh with them a little bit, and it's just been helpful. So I'm very thankful to the ExJW community, and especially the ones who were calm, cool, and collective. I think you're helping many people, and I was a lurker. I was a lurker for, I'd say, almost a year and a half. I was PMO for a year and a half, from August 2023 to January. I was a PMO. Now, I didn't admit I was a PMO till probably late 2024. I finally, because I kept thinking to myself, I was going to salvage this. I kept thinking, I'm missing something. I just got to keep digging. I got to keep looking. But just late last year, I agree. My shoulders dropped, and I just had to confess, like, okay, I'm PMO. I'm out. I'm leaving. Okay. And so, yeah, thank you to all of you, but especially those who were calm, cool, and collective. And even the ones who were angry that I turned off at first, I went back later, and then I understood their anger. I understood, yeah, I'd be mad too. And in fact, someone was asking me, they were saying, oh, you're so bitter. I didn't deny it. I say, okay, yeah, I'm a little bitter, but I can tell you the reason, but witnesses don't want to hear the reason you're bitter. But I think overall, I try not to live my life bitter. But I understand those who are on YouTube and other platforms, when they're yelling, sometimes screaming, they're upset. I get it. I've just recently, I said I'm always talking to myself, but just recently I've gotten to this point where I do get angry at times. For different reasons. Angry at myself sometimes, angry that I was manipulated and lied to, different things like that. But anyway, if Jehovah's Witnesses come to your door, and you're not a witness, you're listening to this, if they come to your door, be nice to them. Jehovah's Witnesses, they mean well. They believe they're doing the right thing. They use their own time, their own money, their own gas, their resources to come to your door. And to them, that is very sacred. That's a special thing to them. And I get it, right? They're reading the scriptures and they're taking some of these things very literal and saying, okay, well, I'm going to go to this person's door. And they might, I tried to always be kind at the door. I was scared to go to people's door. It was difficult. But I did it. But some might come across like, oh, why are they acting this kind of way? But be nice to them. Be kind. Your kindness might help them wake up. How so? If you're mean to a witness, you slam the door, whatever kind of meanness, that feeds into the persecution complex that Jehovah's Witnesses always have. And see, what they believe is, we were just persecuted because we're trying to share the truth. Satan is stopping us from sharing the truth. That's how they believe. That's how I believed. Anytime the persecution has the complete opposite effect of what you might think. You might not care, but others might think, oh, well, I gave him a piece of my mind, and I bet he might think about that the way I talk to him. But if you were mean, if you're rude when witnesses come to the door or they step to you at the bus stop or anywhere, if you're rude and mean, that bolsters their faith because they're at your door, they leave your door, they go back, get into the car, air conditioning's on, the other 2 or 3 people in the car talking and having a conversation. What's the first story you told? Oh, this guy just said this and this to me. This guy just slammed the door. And then part of that conversation is, well, Jehovah's keeping us safe, and it's people don't want the truth, and the devil's not letting them get. That's the kind of conversation. That's the kind of thing persecution does to them. So be kind. If you're genuinely nice and kind to them, you have no idea how powerful that is. Don't underestimate that. I think in part I'm where I'm at today, and I'm thankful for that, even though it's been difficult. But I'm where I'm at today because of the kindness of neighbors that I experienced in the territories that I worked. All those doors that I knocked on. See, when I knock on a door, and this man's there. He's standing there. His church is across the street. I see his kids running behind him at the door. And he's just super kind. He's not trying to knock down all my beliefs. We're not doing like Bible kung fu. He was just kind. And I can think of these different doors that I had. They were just kind. When I walked away, that sort of short-circuited my wires, right? Because I was taught that that's not how people are. They're really, even though they might be acting nice, they're kind of sinister. They're, they don't love God. They don't know the truth. They don't really love Jehovah God, right? So that kindness, even to this day, I think, wow, yeah, that was part of my waking up process, which spanned over decades. And again, for my friends, my family, my brothers, my sisters, if you're still here, I love you. I miss you. I hope you and your families are doing well. I will always be here for you, and you know how to reach me. I'm the same person. I'm a Myri. I'm just goofy, right? Laughing and dancing in front of the mirror, telling bad jokes, just working through life and trying to do the right thing. Thanks again for clicking on this video. I'd love to hear your thoughts and comments. Have a good day.